You mentioned the that your songs sound like they're put together with ADHD, or that there's an ADHD feeling to them. When you're writing songs, are you consciously trying to bring together these different elements, these disparate elements, or do you have stuff pre-written that later on you decide to assemble together?
The ADHD is not something that you decide to do to put into the music. It comes kind of first, isn't it? And so the music ends up being written like that. So when I write riffs, when I get a part of a riff that I like, I'm already thinking about what is going to be the idea that I'm going to put in to contrast with that. And so, when you listen to my riffs, they tend to be three things the same, and then the fourth one is different. That always seems to happen. I didn't choose to do that, but I get bored of the riff being the same all the way through, and then the last one, it always has to be something else. I started to realize at some point that the music could become quite incoherent, and so I've always loved about classical music. With classical music, how you have a theme, and then the theme will come back in the music later, and it will come in a different form. Like a theme will enter in the melody, maybe, and then later on you'll hear it as the bass line, and then you're building on that. And classical music tends to have, like in concerto sonata form or something, tend to have two contrasting ideas. You have the rhythmic idea, and then you have the melodic idea, and then they'll alternate, and then at some point you'll have the development where the ideas will come together and be explored. So coming from a classical music background, I always liked to do that with my metal music. That's always been in there since the very beginning. I've always had riffs that will come back in some other form, and we explored that a lot on Posthuman, and that's still the case now. Like on the last record, The Hollow Man, which came out during the pandemic, I took that idea to the extreme, where the entire album has themes that continuously come back across the different songs. Like the last song and the first song share a lot of themes, although they're in different time signatures and they sound very different. But melodic passages will come back to constantly remind of what's been before, and but yeah, they'll develop and morph. It's always been something that I've liked to play with. Working with the guys in on this Jaja one has been very interesting because for the first time, well, not for the first time, so that's wrong to say, but I got these guys, Camille and Lars, and also George, I got them to write songs as well. So they created the bass, and then I put my things on top. So the first thing I started to do with their music was to find ways that I could link things that they had done that weren't otherwise linked, which you can hear a lot in the song on the new album, Only for You, which was originally by Camille. It's his guitar part that started that song. So I felt like my job was with the vocal and my guitar to create parts that kind of brought it all together, because his music is not like that. His music is like a maelstrom of like there's more, and now it's something different, and now there's something else. So my job was try to kind of link it all together with some thematic chain.
So, how did these songs come together? Were you guys trading files back and forth?
Yes, it was all done over the internet, this album. It was a pandemic album. So I created my riffs and I sent them to them without any instruction. And they created their parts. And sometimes I created the vocal first before I'd heard their parts. Sometimes I did it afterwards. And then I said to them, everybody should have a song. And I did the same on their music like they'd done on mine. So it was a lot of fun. That it was just throwing files out and having no idea what you were going to get back. And it was very productive. Like the songs started to come together very quickly, which is why really it became the new Void album rather than it being another band, because of how the previous lineup of Void didn't survive the pandemic, let's say. We all got separated. We all ended up living in different cities. We couldn't connect together like we had been doing. And instead I was doing these songs with these guys. So it's like, okay, I'm gonna release this as the new Void album now because we are making something. And what could be more healthy for a band than having a new album, right?
So when you say that the previous Void lineup didn't survive the pandemic, does that mean that you guys were or needed to write in a room together or be in constant contact to create songs?
That lineup had become really good at doing shows, at playing gigs. It had become very much more about playing live, and writing new music together was not easy. I did like a lot of the Hollow Man. I just did it on my own, and the other guys did contribute riffs, and they went into the songs. But I wrote and arranged the whole thing kind of alone, and then had them come in and record their parts. It was quite difficult because before the pandemic, for the White Album, which is the second album, we had been a rehearsal room band, and we would get together, me and Joe Burwood, the drummer, and later Rob Archibald on bass, and we would just write the music there together. We would start playing and very often hit record, and very often that would be like, oh, here comes a new song, guys, you know. And that was not happening in the later iteration of that lineup. It simply wasn't possible to get together in the room like that. People just didn't have that amount of free time, and it became harder and harder to get everybody together with everybody's, you know, different lives and different jobs and living in different cities. So it was more about getting together and playing shows, which was great, but we weren't moving forward. We didn't have any new material. So we kind of got a bit stuck. And then when I did the Dudamsgard show, I started working with these other guys. New material was just coming so thick and fast. So it was like, oh, it was really refreshing. Sadly, now it means that I lost the live lineup that I had. And now I've got a new album with these fantastic musicians who are all living in different countries. So we've never even been in the same room together. So although we got a lot of good new music, you know, we definitely lost something of what the band was before.
So as you mentioned, the new Void album is called Jajao,
Yes.
and it will be released on the 7th of December through Brusha Records.
That is correct.
Let's start with the title,
Yes.
Jajao. What does that refer to?
Like many things on this album, the title was a joke. It was a working title. Just we needed to call it something. And Jajao, actually, I probably shouldn't say this. Like, how I'm going to come up with a fake story. Actually, Jajao was a name that my daughter, when she was a toddler, had for the playground. And she would say that she wanted to go, Daddy, Jajao, that she wanted me to take her to the playground. And so when we were creating this new music, it was so fun just throwing in ideas. We had this idea that, like, it's a playground, we can do whatever we want, there's no barrier. So that was like a placeholder. And like many placeholders, it just stuck. It's the same with several of the song titles. They were originally just jokes. They were just placeholders, and then they just stuck. It's actually been the case with previous records as well. When Levi did the vocals for the Tape, which was the Unsearchable Riches of Void EP, Levi LeBlanc was the vocalist for that one. And we'd just put like a silly placeholder title for each of the 4 songs. And he just took those and wrote the lyrics about that. So those placeholders ended up staying. He just turned the one word into kind of like a phrase, like a 6 word, whatever. He expanded on it and turned it into a whole concept. It's kind of like a common theme in the band that, you know, no idea is a bad idea, and ideas go in and they develop, they grow like mold, and they become something so much more than how they began.
So we talked about how you met Lars and some of your other collaborators from playing with Dotheimsgard. How did you know that these were the guys that you wanted to write an album with?
Well, the experience of playing with that band was fantastic, and Lars is such a an accomplished musician. He's also a really easygoing guy, so easy to work with, and so creative. And when he asked me, "Do you want to do something together?" It was like, "Well, yeah, definitely. There's no doubt about that." And I was getting on really well with George, their sound engineer. So it was already happening that during the pandemic, I had started to write new songs, and I was just sending them back and forth with George, and he started programming the drums on them. And it was like, oh, well, Lars came and says, let's do something. And I said, well, me and George are already doing something, so get on this. So the next stage was who's going to play guitar, and Camille was the obvious choice there.
You described the composition process, how the songs came together for this album, and it sounds like a very free form, open way of writing songs. But how do you know when a song is done in this process? When were you happy with what you had?
Oh, it's hard to say, isn't it? I guess when the tank is empty. Some of them start from a place and circle round and then come back, like the first single, Self Isolation. But most of them, it's like the music starts and you're laying down ideas, and one idea will inspire another. And by writing a riff, it inspires another riff. And eventually you get like a nice round package. It's hard to say. There's never been like it should be this long, or it needs to have a slow section and a fast section, and it needs to go through this. There's never been any of that really with this band. It's always been, I don't know, that like the songs write themselves. I think this is probably why there are such massive gaps between the albums. They come in like a frenzy of music writing. There's a frenzy of songwriting, of riff writing, at a time when, for me anyway, I mean, it's different for the other guys, but for me, I get really into playing the guitar in like a chapter of my life, and I'll just churn out loads of riffs and programming drums and mapping the crazy time signatures and just having fun. When you've had fun and you listen through and you say, yeah, that's a piece of music, it's ready, it's done. I don't usually edit things, cut sections out, add things in later. It's normally just like the product of a moment in time, a frenzy, like a train of thought that just runs until it crashes. So that's not a very clearly mapped out formula, is it?
I mean, it sounds like, for some songwriters, it's, either the song is done or they're done, right? Like there's a point where you can't add or change anything to the song anymore. You just have to leave it alone.
Yes, yes. And in the case of our band, I think that time probably came when we ought to have left it alone a long time before we did in several cases, which has resulted in some pretty bizarre and overlayered music. But, it is what it is, The Hollow Man especially, we just kept adding more. That was the one where a friend gave me his plugin of an orchestral suite. I was like, great, well, this is going to be the album that has orchestra on it. And I just couldn't stop playing with it. It was like, you hear a melody inside another melody, and you'd be like, oh, that could be the French horn, or the strings can come in now, and I've got a melody on the guitar, and when the guitar stops playing it, well, the violin will take it over, or I'll put a flute in or something. It's too much, but I can't say that I would have done it any other way because it was just so fun to make. And it was a case of like, for a period of several months, staying up until 3, 5, 6 in the morning, just on a high, just layering up new things.